If I meet someone eager to get into core gaming, I usually tell them to play Skyrim. Skyrim is a unique case, as it usually fills new players with awe at all the things they can do in a world that is rich with lore and seemingly endless possibilities. It also introduces them to the concept of modding games, exploiting bugs, and taking their time to enjoy a standard, if relatively disappointing RPG that'll be re-released until the end of time. God damn it, Bethesda. If I want to alter a person's mindset concerning how they perceive gaming, I usually tell them to play Dark Souls. Here's why. Dark Souls is a third-person, real-time action role-playing game that was created by Japanese game development company From Software, currently helmed by the now infamous Hidetaka Miyazaki. Though as with all noteworthy developers, this was not always the case. From Software had already been around for quite some time and developed a handful of relatively successful titles, but Miyazaki found himself working at From after experiencing the iconic third-person platformer, Ico. After falling in love with that title, it prompted him to leave his desk job behind to pursue the art of creating video games in 2004. Dark Souls is the spiritual successor to Demon's Souls, a PS3 exclusive that was initially struggling in development hell before Miyazaki was assigned to assist with its development, resulting in a title that took many by surprise by its engaging gameplay a short time after its initial release. Its success led to From signing a deal with developer and publisher Bandai Namco to create a game akin to the experience that Demon's Souls presented players, and what we received was Dark Souls for the Xbox 360, PS3, and later, the PC, with the game's bolstering success cementing Miyazaki's place as the company's president, and seeing the birth of a powerhouse of a franchise. The title begins with a prologue explaining the state of Lordran, the land you'll be exploring. During it, we learn that the world was first ruled by dragons during what was known as the Age of Ancients, but after a time, fire came to the world. 4 beings claimed the flame, and along with those that served them, used their combined strength to fight against the dragons, with the assistance of Seath the Scaleless, a dragon who betrayed his own by exposing the weaknesses of his stone-scaled brethren. With their victory came the Age of Fire, a prosperous age of godlike beings and legends. However, after a time, the first flame had begun to fade. Much was done to try and prevent its fading, and some efforts, though good in nature, proved detrimental to the world at large. In light of the fading of the flame, one of the 4 beings, Gwyn, sacrificed himself to fuel the flame in order to prolong the Age of Fire and prevent the upcoming Age of Humans, the Age of Dark. This disruption of the natural order brought about the undead curse, afflicting humans and making them resurrect upon death, essentially becoming immortal. However, should they lose sight of what they're living for, they descend into madness and become feral, also known as becoming hollow. In a bid to save themselves, various kingdoms had rounded up and isolated those afflicted by the curse, with your character's sudden release from such an asylum heralding the start of your journey. The fire is fading once more, and whether or not you choose to link it is your choice. The game has a number of notable influences on its core design, including titles like The Legend of Zelda and Shadow of the Colossus, heavy influence from Kentaro Miura's fantastic dark fantasy manga, Berserk, as well as inspiration from various mythos and real-world architecture playing key roles in influencing the game's world and game design. The title is hailed as a modern classic, and while some of its later marketing capitalizes on an experience that some players may find frustrating, Dark Souls is a game that shapes the player to understand its mechanics and how you should approach the situations it presents. Combat consists of a light attack, heavy attack, a shield-breaking kick, a jumping attack, rolling and backstepping to avoid damage, with follow-up attacks tied onto those actions, and depending on your equipment, the ability to block, parry, and cast various spells, miracles, and pyromancies, should you have the attributes necessary to do so. Each dynamic action depletes stamina, and each fault costs you health points, both of which are simple and age-old game mechanics. However, Your attacks often have a lead up to them, and you can't cancel out of your attack. You have to see your strike through all the way. Additionally, the fact that you can't perform any other actions in order to use your primary method of regaining health, the Estus Flask, means that positioning and stamina management are of the utmost importance. Taking all this into account, you will probably develop a reluctant playstyle on your first time through the title, but eventually, you'll slowly begin to understand that combat in Dark Souls is much like dancing. This principle is something that Rocksteady Studios, the developers behind the Batman Arkham series of games, had in mind while developing that franchise's first entry. During the early stages of its development, that title was originally supposed to be a dancing spin-off game, but as development went on, the game's combat gradually evolved into its simple, yet iconic reaction-based system, with prompts to assist the player enabled by default. Similarly, mastering the combat of Dark Souls is much like learning a rhythm. If you approach combat with cautious optimism, success is just a matter of analyzing the moveset of your enemies, and then dancing to the beat. It's simple yet effective, and while enemies subtly cue attacks, not all of their animations are of the standard variety, tensing up combat from even the scrawniest of enemies, and punishing any mistake you might make, usually resulting in your demise. Upon death, you'll be returned to the lost bonfire you found and rested at. These function as safe havens, which will allow you to level up your character and refreshes your Estus charges. But resting at a bonfire or respawning also resurrects downed enemies, which has the potential to hinder your progress. Killing enemies nets you souls. Use souls to buy new items, castable abilities, to upgrade armor and weapons, and level up. If you die, you lose your souls. Your unspent souls are dropped at the place where you last perished, and are able to be retrieved should you muster the strength to visit the location of your demise. Die before reaching your lost souls, and they're gone for good. The loss of potential strength from losing souls is another simple gameplay peg, but since the player cannot store their souls, it presses them to progress, and this drives them to either improve or face consequence. Additionally, because enemies resurrect after resting at a bonfire or after death, it makes the player consider treading carefully when exploring a new area, lest they die in an unsavory location and lose their souls. Conversely, should the player find the game too difficult, they could farm enemies in the vicinity to gain souls and level up, though this method is particularly tedious as souls you gain from common enemies increases as you progress through the title. Regardless of how strong you become, however, the player's own skill determines success in combat encounters, and you'll either be forged to gain the reflexes necessary to succeed, or be a part of the percentage of people who haven't even rung the first bell, you know. Your character will switch between two states during gameplay, human and hollow. You begin the game in a hollow state that can restore your humanity by using humanity, a resource that can be gained in various ways as you progress through the game. Dying while human reverts you to a hollow state, restricting certain actions that you can perform, but not inhibiting you to progress forward. If progress does seem impossible, however, you might find a player willing to assist you and ease your burden, as they either guide you through an area or help you fight a boss, done by selecting summoning signs left by other players while in human form. You also have the option to invade the worlds of other players if they're in human form, spicing up their game and vice versa. Covenants can also be joined, which incentivizes invading other players, with each covenant having unique invasion mechanics and rewards. PvP encounters have naturally become a major aspect of the franchise for many players, while invading and assisting other players are aspects that have become synonymous with Dark Souls, making them activities that dedicated players can turn to whenever they feel like exercising their humanity. The level design of Dark Souls is something that many hold in high regard, and this is due to how areas are masterfully interconnected with each other. But its Metroidvania-esque design becomes more apparent as you discover secrets and new ways to enter areas. Considering the title has no form of an in-game map whatsoever, designing areas to be distinct, yet look and flow organically was paramount, and this was done by making areas feel less like levels and more like a world that the player is intruding upon. This resulted in designing the game's exploration element as a series of well-defined hub worlds as opposed to an open sandbox. It's for this reason that the game could be called a linear open-world title, because while there are multiple paths to take from the start, the player will organically piece together how to proceed. This was done by way of enemy placement and shaping the terrain to guide the player, but not explicitly show them where to go in order to progress. Another special aspect of the level design of Dark Souls is its verticality. Action RPGs usually take place with the player stretching across swaths of land that lead to linear stages, creating a straightforward, if tedious bridge between sections of a game. Dark Souls subverts this notion by making the majority of its levels a series of descending or ascending stages, so while the standard ARPG uses distances of space to create the illusion of progress, Dark Souls sees the player winding through maze-like corridors and halls from the get-go, which are designed with the philosophy of maximizing use of given space without breaking immersion for the player. It's also the reason why the third-person camera sits so close to the player, and why the game's field of view is usually locked to a narrow 43 degrees. This creates feelings of tension and intimacy with one's surroundings, while simultaneously funneling the vision of the player, tricking them into focusing on progressing instead of wandering around. Your journey through the title will mostly be accompanied by the ambient sounds of your surroundings, which serve as atmospheric interludes, while simultaneously keeping the player alert at all times. However, when a sweeping symphony does begin to play, you'll most likely be facing one of the many challenging bosses that the series has become revered for. In addition to their distinct movesets and arenas, most have unique stories attached to them. While titles like Left 4 Dead and Resident Evil opt to use text on walls as a storytelling mechanic, the story of Dark Souls is something that surrounds the player, if they choose to open their eyes to see what's in front of them. The environment works in tandem with short item descriptions attached to every collectible item in the game, which alludes to the lore of the land you're traversing. It's much like reading a book with its pages split into jigsaw puzzle pieces, with each fragment revealing more about locations, items, and all manner of beings, harkening back to Miyazaki's own childhood. From infancy, Miyazaki grew up reading whatever he could get his hands on from his local library, and this led to him not fully understanding what he'd be reading at times. This inspired him to make up parts of a story accompanying what he could comprehend, essentially rewriting a story in his own vision, a fragment of his own past that has become a major aspect of Dark Souls, as the player slowly deciphers aspects of the experience and fills in the blanks with what they may not understand, or what they choose to believe. High fantasy games usually strive to have the morals of their characters drenched in a shade of grey instead of stark black and white tones, and the way Dark Souls executes on this notion is understated, but works perfectly. Regardless of how sinister some might seem, everyone has motives behind their actions, either acting against you for their gain, the gain of their superior, or the love of someone they hold dear. While this may seem tropey, the fact that we can choose to learn these details if we seek them out adds quite a layer of depth and intimacy to the characters you may encounter, as well as the various beings we've only heard whispers about throughout the franchise. Despite everything the game does right, however, Dark Souls is far from flawless. Parts of it were evidently rushed to meet deadlines, some areas lack proper optimization, AI pathfinding is mediocre at best, and the PC port was disappointing, to say the least. Console-developed games have had a long history of being subpar PC ports, but up until recently, Japanese developers and publishers were quite adamant about having their titles not appear on the platform at all. However, Dark Souls may be the reason why we're beginning to see more Japanese publishers bring their games to the platform. Thanks to a petition that actually worked, Dark Souls made its way to the PC, and despite being quite a petty port before the community got involved with stabilizing the PC build of the game, and it sold a substantial amount on the platform, with the game now nearing 3 million copies sold on Steam alone. This caused Bandai Namco to continue porting future entries of the franchise to the platform, but their success also garnered interest from other Japanese publishers. It's oft not considered, but Dark Souls laid the framework which slowly caused Japanese publishers to bring their games to the PC, which has resulted in many classics and brand new titles to finally make their debut on the platform at long last. Dark Souls has become the new benchmark for difficult games, and has inspired a new subgenre of the RPG, the Souls-like, with quite a number of titles choosing to emulate the mechanics of the franchise. One thing is often missing from their formula, however, and that's player retention through community. Indeed, the community of this franchise is one of the most special aspects about it, as it's filled with passionate players, people theorizing lore together, and the emergence of imaginative content, both outside and within the game. This symbiotic connection between players and the title was formed organically, but was also due to deliberate design decisions by From Software. The game's veiled difficulty is appealing to many, but it's also something that leads many newer players to have trouble playing the title, which would naturally generate conversation outside of the game. PvP and summoning has not only added to the longevity of Dark Souls, but fostered an extremely active community and following. Additionally, the game's lore is a hefty part of the experience for many players, and this has caused entire channels and communities to work together in order to understand more about the franchise as a whole. All these factors accumulate into a ferociously loyal, yet self-aware fanbase. Your own affinity with the Soulsborne titles will vary wildly based off of which game you played first, though there's an underlying reason why so many who have triumphed over the original Dark Souls are so enamored by it. In a time where games were designed to use oversimplified mechanics instead of refining aspects of its design, Dark Souls was a breath of fresh air. It was a game conceived not to challenge any gaming notions, however, but was made to be the kind of game the developers themselves would enjoy playing, which is the key reason why this game has so much depth to it, and why it's cherished by so many players. Much like how ego was the reason why Miyazaki got into creating games, Dark Souls has cemented itself as an immortal part of the minds of many. It's far from a perfect game, but has brought many the joy of an unforgettable experience, filled with challenge, cooperation, intrigue, and respite. And truly, that's what makes a game memorable. That's what makes a game interesting and exciting to play. That is Dark Souls.